In the 1940s, Guy Bostick sold his family's only car, over his wife's objection, to buy one truck. He figured 25 trucks would mean he'd made it. 70 years later, the company he built became one of the biggest trucking failures in American history. The company was Commercial Carrier Corporation, founded in 1953. For a long time, it did exactly what Bostick hoped it would. It hauled freight, it made money, and it grew. But not the way most people assume companies grow. Commercial Carrier didn't just add trucks, it bought other men's companies and folded them into what eventually became Comcar Industries. The biggest catch came in 1987. Out in Elm Springs, Arkansas, there was a refrigerated carrier called Willis Shaw Express. The man it was named after had started out hauling live poultry and built one of the most successful specialized trucking operations in the country, the kind of outfit that knew how to move perishable freight before refrigerated hauling was really a science. Comcar bought it. 6 years later, it folded another carrier, Clay Hyder Trucking Lines, into the same operation. That was the pattern. Flatbed work out of Georgia, chemical and bulk tanker freight out of Florida, truckload out of South Dakota. One nameplate at a time, Comcar assembled a fleet that ran into the thousands, spread across 4 separate trucking companies and a web of parts, repair, and logistics operations that kept them all running. Every one of those nameplates had once been somebody's life's work, a company with its own drivers, its own yards, its own reputation, now reduced to a division on a bigger company's balance sheet. To a driver in the 1990s, a Comcar rig was just part of the scenery. One more fleet in a business full of them. What none of those drivers could have known was how the story ended, with the family that built the whole thing no longer owning any of it. There's a name for what Comcar was doing. It's called a roll-up. You buy established operators one after another, put them under a single corporate roof, and run them as divisions of one big company. On paper, it looks powerful. You get scale, you get buying power, you get a fleet number big enough to impress a banker. What you also get is a company that's only as sound as the debt you took on to build it. Every one of those acquisitions had to be paid for, and trucking margins have never been the kind that leave much room for error. When the end came, in the spring of 2020, there were 2 easy explanations for it, and both of them missed the point. The first was the pandemic. Comcar filed for bankruptcy in May of 2020, right as COVID was tearing through the freight market, and it was tempting to pin the whole collapse on that. But the company had been bleeding for more than a decade. It never fully recovered from the 2008 recession. By the time the virus showed up, COVID wasn't the cause. It was the last nail. The second explanation was darker. On April 5, 2020, about 6 weeks before the filing, Comcar's chief executive, Randy Clark, died suddenly. He was 60 years old, and he'd only held the job since November. A company that loses its CEO and files for bankruptcy inside of 2 months invites the obvious conclusion. But Comcar's own people shot it down. They said plainly that the bankruptcy had nothing to do with Clark's death, and the timeline backs them up. Clark had been in the chair for a matter of months. Whatever killed this company had been in motion long before he ever showed up. If anything, the churn at the top was a symptom, not a cause. Clark had taken over from a man named Michael Ryan, who'd run the place for only about 2 years himself. Healthy companies don't cycle through chief executives like that. Companies being steered toward an exit do. Because the truth is, the Bostick family had already lost the company years earlier, and almost no one outside the boardroom knew it. Somewhere in the long slide of falling profits after the recession, Comcar sank deep into debt to a lender. And by 2016, that lender wasn't just a creditor anymore. It owned roughly 90% of the company. This was a private business. No stock ticker, no press releases, so the handover barely registered. But the largest shareholder in this old Florida trucking family's empire was, by then, a Wall Street bond fund. The lender was tied to PIMCO, one of the biggest fixed-income investors on Earth. That kind of arrangement changes how a company gets run. When the outfit that owns you is the same one that holds your debt, the priorities shift. The business stops being run to build something and starts being run to protect a loan. Money that might once have gone toward new trucks or new terminals goes to keeping the creditors whole instead. And a trucking company that isn't reinvesting is a trucking company that's quietly shrinking, whether anyone admits it out loud or not. On its own website, Comcar still advertised 4,000 trucks, about 4,500 employees, and dozens of terminals across the lower 48. That was the image. The reality by the time it filed was closer to 1,200 trucks and about the same number of drivers. The company had been hollowed out for years. For the people still driving for it, the decline was the kind you feel before anyone puts it in writing. The operation getting leaner, familiar faces not getting replaced. It had lost $25 million in 2019 alone and another $6 million in the opening months of 2020. On paper, it held roughly $67 million in assets against nearly $86 million in liabilities. It was underwater before the pandemic ever touched it. So by the time Comcar went into bankruptcy, the family that built it didn't control it anymore. That didn't mean the Bosticks were finished with it. Mark Bostick, the founder's son and himself a former chief executive of Comcar, had been forced out of the company. He'd even won an arbitration award of roughly $500,000 over the way his termination was handled. And when the pieces of the family empire went up for sale in the bankruptcy, he came back to buy some of them. He put together a deal through his own company. On one side, he'd take two of Comcar's operations, a bulk carrier and a truck repair shop, plus real estate valued at more than $4 million. On the other side, what he'd hand over was a load of used trailers the creditors figured were worth maybe $1 million. The people Comcar owed money to looked at that math and were not amused. The Unsecured Creditors Committee, in a court filing, wrote that the fairness of the arrangement leaves one scratching her head, and compared it to Tom Sawyer's swindle, the old trick of talking someone into paying you for the privilege of doing your work. To be fair to Bostick, that was the creditor's characterization, not a judge's ruling. He disputed their numbers, said his offer had been improved, and in the end, the two sides settled. But the picture stays with you. The founder's own son, standing in the wreckage of the company his father started with a single truck, publicly accused of trying to shortchange the creditors on his way out the door. When the dust finally settled, Comcar didn't so much disappear as get carved up and hauled off. 3 of its 4 main trucking operations went to a single buyer, TFI International, the largest trucking company in Canada. The chemical carrier went to a Houston outfit called Service Transport. TFI won more than one bidding war to get its share, paying $15 million for one division and nearly $13 million for another, outbidding rival carriers each time. And there's a strange grace note at the end of all this. 5 months earlier, another big carrier, Celadon, had collapsed overnight and left something like 3,000 drivers stranded with no warning at all. Comcar's bankruptcy was the opposite kind. Worked out with the lenders in advance before it was ever filed, so the trucks kept rolling, and most of the drivers kept their seats even as the company was sold off underneath them. A trucking family that began when a man sold his car to buy one truck ended 70 years later as line items on a Canadian conglomerate's acquisition list. The name came off the doors. The freight kept moving.